After exploring the future of each Family Guy character, I've decided that we should now dive into their pasts, and in doing so, we might just find out exactly what shaped them into being the messed up individuals that they are. And speaking of messed up, let's start with Bonnie Swanson. Now, luckily, we have seen quite a lot of Bonnie's past, and it's wild. In the early 80s, she was working as a stripper when one night Joe and his fellow cops burst in and raided the club. But before he could arrest her, she gave him a lap dance that rocked his world. Their chemistry was undeniable, and they quickly fell in love. And from what we saw in their old home videos, they seemed genuinely happy together and eventually had a son called Kevin. And then when Bonnie got pregnant with Susie, they decided to move to Spooner Street for a bigger house and raise their growing family.
Now give me some sugar.
But as we all know, their happy marriage soon fell apart.
I want a divorce!
You got it!
Brian Griffin. Brian was born on a puppy farm, and right from the start, he was vastly different from his siblings. Like, he could talk.
Hey, does anyone here have thumbs? Anyone? No? Ah!
One day, he was picked up and taken away, and his mother, Biscuit, did nothing to stop it. This left Brian with deep abandonment issues that would stick with him for the rest of his life.
For God's sake, my eyes were barely open and she just gave me away. Well, it's her loss, right?
We don't really know too much about his father, other than the fact that he was a racist who unfortunately passed these views down to Brian.
Please forgive me. I get that from my father. He's from a different generation.
Brian was first adopted by the Henderson family, who were a smart and accomplished bunch, and is here where he probably got his pompous sense of superiority.
How are you all actually this dumb? I can't even believe I've wasted my intellect living here.
So trying to fit in with the family, he went to Brown University but dropped out halfway through, and feeling like a failure, he couldn't face returning home, so joined the Peace Corps.
But 6,000 miles and all the dope I could smoke still couldn't separate me from my problems.
After coming back to the US, Brian was homeless, scraping by washing car windows for spare change, but that's when he met Peter, who invited him for dinner. It was soon after this that they adopted him, and Brian became an official Griffin. However, this backstory has since been retconned. For example, in the episode The Man with Two Bryans, there's home videos with Brian as a puppy. And he's already living in the Griffin house. Basically, Family Guy doesn't give a crap about continuity, which makes my job connecting all these flashbacks together very, very hard. So you may ask, why bother then? And my answer to that is, well, it's fun, so just roll with it, alright? Carter and Babs Pewterschmidt. Carter's always had a bad temper. Like when he was younger, Babs accidentally knocked a beach ball into him, and his response was to knock her out. Carter actually admired how well she could take the punch though, and that's how they fell in love.
Boy, you can take a punch, but at the same time, you cowered a little bit. Now that's a woman.
Not exactly a fairy tale meet cute, but yeah, there you have it. When the Great War with Alaska broke out, Carter was sent off to fight, but while he was away, he kept the romance alive by sending mixtapes to Babs. But eventually, those mixtapes stopped coming, and Carter was presumed dead. Heartbroken, Babs turned her attention to another suitor called Reginald. But during one ball, Carter showed up from absolute nowhere, Babs knocked Reginald out, and Carter asked her to be his wife. They went on to have 3 children, first a son called Patrick, who after witnessing his mum sleep with Jackie Gleason became the fat guy strangler and ended up in a mental health institution, and then they had 2 daughters called Carol and Lois. As a parent, Carter was extremely neglectful, missing all of the important moments in his kids' lives. He spent most of his time working, doing Coca-Cola and eating sushi.
Yeah, we never had a lot of daddy-daughter time when I was young. You were always so busy.
Not now, kitten.
Now, normally I do like to keep these videos fun, but there is something seriously dark that I probably should mention. So, in the episode Welcome Back Carter, he mumbles this in his sleep.
It's okay, Lois. Daddy's just taking your temperature. What?
Thus hinting that some kind of abuse occurred. Now, I know Family Guy has some dark humor, but come on, this revelation is seriously messed up. Chris Griffin. Baby Chris was so big that a local newspaper called him an elephant child.
After he was born, they had to rearrange most of my organs.
Oh yeah, he dragged half of Lois right out with him.
Oh my god, poor Lois. Chris was not planned at all. On the night he was conceived, Lois and Peter were using a condom, but it broke, and Chris showed up 9 months later. Lois and Peter ended up suing the company that made the defective condom, using the settlement money to buy their new home.
You're my favorite mistake.
It's also been said that Chris had a twin who was a stillbirth and that they named him after Christmas. But here's the odd part. Some seasons later, Peter casually mentions Chris's adoption papers.
It was in a box with Chris's adoption papers. Oh.
This was backed up in season 19 when it was revealed that Chris was actually stolen from a Dutch family.
Chris doesn't remember we stole him from a Dutch family.
What's this now?
I miss our stolen son in America. Do you think he remembers us?
So, which is the truth? Well, I have no idea. I don't think even Family Guy knows by this point. Well, whoever Chris's real parents were, he was a super unhealthy child.
He's like 3 years old and he's in a mobility scooter rolling around an oxygen tank.
Chris was also picked on at school for the way he peed, and he never ever got a Valentine's Day card. So Lois and Peter created Arthur Valentine, basically a Valentine's Day version of Santa who would leave him presents on February 14th. But unlike most kids who'd outgrow the idea of Santa, no, I'm joking kids, he does exist, Chris keeps believing that Arthur Valentine does exist for years. And it wasn't until much later that he finally learned the truth.
There is no Arthur Valentine?
His name is Cleveland Brown. Cleveland grew up in Stewart, Virginia, and his father was absolutely cruel to him.
Your grandfather used to make me box him to get my Christmas presents. I got one for every round I lasted.
When he was at school, he was madly in love with a girl called Donna. Unfortunately for him though, Donna was far more interested in local bad boy Robert Tubbs, so trying to move on, Cleveland dated a girl called Maxine, but after they broke up, he decided to leave town. And that's where he met Peter Griffin for the first time.
Nothing's too far away from Maxine the cheating queen.
Peter got Cleveland a job at the country club and the two quickly became close friends, even coming up with their own special handshake.
Slap me 5, slap me 10, round the side, and back again.
It was also around this time where Cleveland was working as an auctioneer when he took a knock to the noggin that slowed his speech. A couple of years later, Cleveland, Peter and Quagmire moved to the big city and rented an apartment together. But when it was time to settle down, they all returned to Quahog and bought houses right next to each other on Spooner Street. Soon after this, Cleveland then opened up his own deli, married a woman called Loretta, and had his own son called Cleveland Brown Jr. Dr. Hartman. Family Guy hasn't revealed too much about Dr. Hartman's backstory, but what we do know is that he has a very overbearing mother who still babies him.
Elmer? What, Mom? You promised I could get a cookie if I finished all my surgery.
Did you?
And despite being middle-aged, his dad still has to buy him his cinema tickets.
Okay, Dad, you got us in. Now just go.
Despite claiming to go to B University, he doesn't appear to have any kind of medical degree at all. Instead, he proudly displays his fake Yale University degree on his office wall.
Yale Medical School.
Wow, that's impressive.
Thank you. I work very hard on my calligraphy.
Donna Tubbs. Donna was a very popular girl in high school, catching the eyes of Cleveland and Robert Tubbs. And at one point, Cleveland actually stood a chance with Donna, but he managed to screw it up in a pretty big way. When Donna fell into the fountain at Stallbent Galleria, both Cleveland and Robert tried to save her. But while Robert rushed to her aid, Cleveland was far more concerned with keeping his clothes and shoes dry, rather than actually doing anything to help. This act of heroism was enough to win Donna over, and she ended up with Robert. Sometime after graduating, Donna left Stallbend for an extended period to fight on the Foxy boxing circuit. But Donna's past isn't just limited to the boxing ring. No, she also had a surprising career as a movie star, starring in a blaxploitation film called Hot Cocoa Bang Bang.
Bang, bang, honkies!
Donna's marriage to Robert was passionate, but also incredibly toxic. But despite their dysfunctional relationship, they still ended up with two very good things: her children, Rallo and Roberta. Ernie the Giant Chicken. One of the biggest WTF questions in Family Guy is, why is there a mother clucking chicken walking around? Where did Ernie come from? Well, this question was finally answered in season 9 when Dr. Hartman casually mentions that he once tried to clone a chicken.
The result wound up being a man-sized chicken that was incredibly hostile and ended up escaping from the lab.
Now, let's go back to the 80s when Ronald Reagan was president.
The actor? He's president?
Peter, you're the one from the future. You should know. Forget it.
In the episode Meet the Quagmires, Peter goes back in time in order to correct the timeline that he messed up. This includes knocking out Quagmire and kissing Lois at the big dance. Now with the timeline realigned, Peter is ready to partay. And while Brian performs an absolute fire number of "Never Gonna Give You Up," Peter gets a little too excited and accidentally punches Ernie. But his friend advises him to ignore it as he'll never bump into him again. And although you could argue that this interaction may never have happened if Peter had never time travelled, I believe that Peter had always punched Ernie at the dance. And thus, a long, furious feud ignited. Because have you ever heard the phrase saying that revenge is a dish best served cold? Well, Ernie waited until the dish was bloody freezing, waiting 2 whole decades to get payback. His master plan? Well, he gave Peter an expired coupon, making him look like an absolute fool when he tried to redeem it. I mean, I'd hate that. My social anxiety would be through the roof. Greased up deaf guy. The origins of this bizarre character had been a mystery for years.
You're never gonna catch me!
But we finally got an answer in season 11. You see, when he was late for a meeting, he was caught in the explosion of a grease truck, and thus, Greased Up Deaf Guy was born. Herbert the P-word. Herbert served in the Air Force in World War II as a fighter pilot, and during one battle, he was shot out of the sky and was captured by the Germans. And seeing as his wallet contained pictures of boys, they thought he was gay and took him to a concentration camp. This is where they forced him to do all kinds of terrible things like sorting through recyclables.
It would spill out of my hands and make them kinda sticky.
In the episode Family Guy Through the Years, a younger Herbert knocks on the Griffin's door and announces that he's moved to town. He introduces himself as Herbert and not Roy Mitchell, aka the guy who was accused of doing all kinds of things 3 towns over.
Because again, I'm Herbert.
So yeah, Herbert isn't his real name, and he created a fake identity to escape from law enforcement. And sure, this was a non-canon episode, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is how he introduced himself in the real Family Guy timeline. Ida Davis. Ida Davis was born with the assigned male gender and was given the name Daniel Quagmire by her parents. And in the season 17 episode Trans Fat, we find out that she grew up in the small town of Football, Texas. And during her childhood, she was teased relentlessly for being different and dressing funny.
I had an epiphany. It was so clear. I was a girl trapped in a boy's body.
However, she buried those thoughts for the next 47 years.
In those 47 years, I became an expert at hiding my secret. I became a war hero and raised a family.
And serving in the Vietnam War, she became a decorated war hero and reached the rank of lieutenant commander. Not only did Ida serve on the sea, but she also served in the air as a fighter pilot. Despite marrying and having kids, we don't ever see Ida and her former spouse Crystal ever interact.
Did you hear about your ex-husband yet? He had a procedure.
And with Ida's military schedule, she wasn't around too much to see her kids grow up. So Glenn's mum, Crystal, cheated on Ida countless times and made a terrible impression on young Glenn.
The only way I learned my ABCs was by learning the names of all the guys my mom slept with.
We can also presume that Ida is the parent of Brenda and Gary, but since neither were present for Ida's surgery, it could be that they're just not very close, or she's not actually their biological parent. I mean, Glenn did learn the alphabet by rehearsing the names of the guys his mum's cheated on Ida with, so yeah, that's most probably right. Joe Swanson. Before his move to Spooner Street, Joe Swanson was a cop in another town, and it was on the job where he met Bonnie, his future wife, as, yeah, I've already mentioned. In addition to Bonnie and Joe being married by the time they moved to Spooner Street, they also had a son. In the past, Joe was injured on the job and was paralysed from the waist down. Joe's original story was that he was injured while chasing the Grinch at Christmas. But the reality was much less cartoonish. It turns out that he was shot while on an undercover assignment. Joe was investigating a heroin dealer named Bobby Briggs when he found out that Joe was a cop. And so the accident left him paralysed from the waist down and Bobby Briggs got away. And he would finally get his revenge many years later by shooting him in the kneecaps. Lois Griffin. As already mentioned, Lois grew up in a wealthy but cold and distant family. This was very apparent in season 2's Let's Go to the Hob, where we learn that Lois was kidnapped on the night of her junior prom. And despite being told that she would be killed if Carter didn't comply with their ransom demands, he refused to negotiate with the kidnappers.
She'll be all right.
To add to this, her father also briefly sold her to a circus freak show when she was a kid.
Me likey bouncy, me likey bouncy.
Later on, when Lois was in college, she starred in a porno film called Quest for Fur, and ashamed of her past, she kept this a secret for years. But this was until she became friends with Joyce Kinney, a reporter who she confided in about her saucy past. Unfortunately, Joyce held a grudge against Lois for bullying her back in high school, and in her revenge, she exposed Lois's secret to the entire town. Initially ashamed, Lois eventually decided to own up to it, and in a very bold move, she showed the porno to everybody at church, embracing her past rather than hiding from it.
I know I'm a man of God, but that is hot.
After this, Lois met Peter, who was working as a towelboy at her father's country club, and she was instantly attracted to his brash persona and his in-your-face attitude, which was so refreshing when comparing him to the other rich, boring men that she had been surrounded by for years. The two quickly fell in love and, despite her father's objections, got engaged, but it would take some time before they finally tied the knot because they'd moved to New York and had an on and off, on again relationship for a while. Eventually they eloped and got married at Fenway Park, but their wedding day wasn't exactly smooth sailing when Peter caught a ball during a live game, and so the crowd turned on them, throwing food at the newlyweds.
I was having serious regrets about my decision, but was already pregnant with Meg, so there was no backing out.
And speaking of her little accident, let's now move on to Meg Griffin. Or should I say Megatron Harvey Oswald Griffin. So yeah, Meg didn't have the best start in life.
Okay, that wasn't the cord, and now you've got a girl.
As well as having her pee-pee snipped off, she was also born with a serious birth defect. Her heart was on top of her head.
That's not supposed to be there, so she should probably always wear a hat.
And if that wasn't bad enough, she was also born with a tail.
And your tail? My what? Nothing.
Her parents tried to abandon her at a fire station shortly after being born. And Peter cared so little for his daughter that he thought that she was a house pet for the longest time.
For the first 4 years of your life, I thought you were a house cat. Dad!
So yes, Peter has always treated Meg as a subhuman, but maybe that's because Peter's not even her real father, because Brian once revealed that her real dad is someone called Stan Thompson. This may explain why Peter treats Meg so damn badly. Lois may have had an affair and he sees Meg as a reminder of that. Or I might just be reading a bit too much into it and Peter just treats Meg like a shitbag because, well, he's awful. Mort Goldman. He managed all the hottest disco acts. He had it all, but sadly, he got addicted to olives. By 1975, his habit consumed him and he lost everything. Even his voice and his hair changed.
What has happened to you, Mort Goldman? You've hit rock bottom.
After this, he kicked the olive addiction and met Muriel, and together they had a son called Neil.
I remember when Muriel and I had our first kiss, and it was just awful. Oh, just awful.
Peter Griffin. Peter was the result of a one-night stand between his mum and a drunk guy called Mickey McFinnigan. She had planned to terminate the pregnancy, so she crossed the border into Mexico to do so, but she left it a bit too late and Peter popped out just like a piñata. Shortly after his birth, his mother married a strict Catholic man called Francis, who Peter believed to be his real father, even though Francis constantly told him that he wasn't.
Happy Father's Day, Dad!
I'm not your father.
Peter also had a sister called Karen who made his life hell by constantly picking on him. And he also had a broster too.
Hey Peter, you want to see my paginas?
I don't know.
Although some have said that they're the same person, but personally, I think they're two different people. So, did you know that Peter is actually bi? The first boy he ever fell in love with was at an aquarium, and then in high school, Peter continued to have strong feelings towards boys and participated in wrestling as a way to be physically closer to them. And when he turned 18, he got a job at Carter Pewterschmidt's country club, and he fell head over heels for Lois.
That's some world-class juice you got brewing in the old flesh balloon down there, Carter. Huh? Okay.
But Carter didn't approve and, in fact, knocked Peter out and dumped him in the middle of the ocean. Luckily, Quagmire found him, and with a lift home from Cleveland, Peter made it back and confronted Carter, who offered him $1 million to stay away from Lois.
Lois may be worth $1 million to you, but to me, she's worthless. I love her, Mr. Pewterschmidt.
And as we all know, he and Lois got married, and the rest is history. Quagmire. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and with a mother like Crystal, it's no wonder why Quagmire is all kinds of messed up. Quagmire was actually born 9 times, as his mother asked him to be continually reinserted back inside of her.
I was born 9 times that day, and things never got easier.
Due to his mother's promiscuous ways, he learned his ABCs by memorizing all the guys his mother slept with.
Those are just some of the guys. There are lots of other guys.
It's because of his dysfunctional childhood that Quagmire blames his sordid lifestyle on his mother.
You've never apologized once for the way you raised me. You're the one who made me what I am.
Aside from his mummy issues, in school he was bullied and essayed by a girl called Tracy. It's possible that this incident also contributed to Quagmire's horrific treatment of women. After graduating, he followed in Ida's footsteps and joined the Navy, and it was while docked in multiple countries that he fathered a lot of illegitimate children.
Me voy a ver los toros, giggity, giggity, giggity.
While he was stationed in South Korea, he got an acting gig in a soap opera called Winter Summer. Here he had a fling with a co-star called Soo-jin, and they even adopted a cat together. But when his character American Johnny was written out, he wouldn't see Soo-jin again for several decades. After leaving the Navy, he fell in love with a woman called Cheryl Teagues, but when actor James Woods stole her away, it left a hole in Quagmire's heart that he tried to fill in by becoming a playboy, moving from one woman onto the next one. But even after all these years, he still thinks about her daily. Sheamus. In a season 18 flashback set in the 90s, we see a young Sheamus with all 4 limbs. This flashback implies that he lost his limbs at Sharkbite Cove, which is probably where he also lost sight in his right eye.
What, how the hell are you alive?
But in the season 9 premiere, and then there were fewer, Sheamus offers another story. He claims he dropped acid with James Woods, who then ate his arms and legs. Given Sheamus's love for tales though, we might never get the real story. Stewie Griffin. Stewie might just be a 1-year-old, but there's actually quite a lot to unpack when it comes to his backstory. So let's start at the very beginning, his conception. In a flashback, we meet Sperm Stewie, and he's already conniving, blasting his competition in order to enter Lois's egg first. And of course he won, but that victory came with a catch. He found himself trapped inside a confined space for 9 months, slowly losing his mind. Eventually though, there was light at the end of the tunnel, and Stewie was finally born.
Wait a minute, I don't think we're through here.
Oh my god, is it twins?
No, it's a map of Europe.
Thanks to some time-traveling shenanigans involving a time machine malfunction, Stewie was actually born twice. After time began flowing in reverse, Stewie was, shall we say, reinserted back into Lois. And once Brian got the timeline back on track, Stewie was born all over again.
You know, I forgot what a man cave I had in Lois's uterus. While I was waiting for you, I was shooting pool.
Although Stewie's signature football-shaped head was there at birth, a flashback did also reveal that he once had a regular round head. That was until he hit it on the ceiling while bouncing on the bed. Tom Tucker. Tom Tucker was literally born to be a newsman.
This just out, me! That happened? Is that for real? That's nuts.
Hilariously, he was born with a mustache, but underneath it is an unfortunate birthmark, which is why he can never shave it. We don't really know too much about his family, except that he has an identical twin brother called Tim.
Good afternoon, I'm Tim Tucker, not my twin brother Tom.
Tom was once engaged to Lois Griffin, but right before they tied the knot, Peter intervened and stopped the wedding. Later, he then got married to a woman called Stacy, but their marriage turned out to be a very, very unhappy one.
Can my wife Stacy get you anything?
Go to hell, Tom.
Already there, hun.
Trisha Takawa. There haven't been too many flashbacks concerning Trisha's childhood, but what we do know is that her mother was extremely strict and overbearing.
You're not good! You're not good on news! You're stiff like watching board!
And so we've come to the end of the video, and if I have missed any other character, it's because we haven't seen any backstory from them. I'm sorry about it, but do let me know in the comments if you'd like to see this format with any other animated show. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.